So in this short video about GCSE supplementary materials, I'm going to go through notes first. So we've got two main things in music. We've got the notes and the rhythm, but they're not the only two things. They're not the only two things in GCSE music. There's rhythm and a note there, but of course we've got contour, we've got dynamics, we've got expression, we've got phrasing, we've got all of those other things which actually make a massive difference when you think about music. So notes-wise, in the middle of the piano, we've got middle C. Now if I just click on MuseScore on the screen here, you can see that I've just drawn a note there. Now that is on something called the Treble Clef. You can see a note that looks a bit like a planet with a ring round it. So if I play other notes, they basically go up the ladder of your music stave, as it's called. This means if you know where one note is on the stave, actually you can work out where any of them are. You don't need to be a lightning music reader to begin Music GCSE. By the time you finish it, you're starting to really get to grips with what it's all about. It's much, much easier than the alphabet that we all use. So, music is composed of 7 letters only, A to G. If you keep going, you're going to end up in trouble. So when you get to G, it goes back round to A again. So G and A. They are next to each other on the music stave, even though the letter goes back to the beginning. So you have lots of different, if I just, for example, just delete all of this. One good way of learning music on the stave is to say, well, okay, why don't we learn what's in the spaces? So you have those 4 notes, F, A, C, E. They spell the word face. So that means your spaces from the bottom space to the top space. Fine. If you know what face is, if you know what 4 notes are, 4, that means you can find any of those notes in between. So midway between F and A, you get G, which is on the line. So if I go to A here, that has now become a G instead of A. Now that's fine. Bass clef. This is essentially the same sort of thing, but it deals with notes that are further to the left on the piano. So if I just go to bass clef, for example, if I play A, that's now in the bottom space, whereas it was F in the treble clef before, and then C, and then E, and then G. So we have ourselves the phrase, all cows eat grass. Well, you'd hope they would. So that represents the notes in your bass clef. Once you've done that, essentially you can get all of the other notes to work fine. So if I just delete that. Now what happens if there's a note that's outside the range? What happens if you have something like this? Well, you have to build extra lines up. So the stave continues. You've got your 5 lines, but then you build notes that go above that. So you could have... They become quite difficult to read. Don't worry about that, because there are various ways of notating that. You could say the D here. If you said D and then put it up an octave, you know where to play it on your instrument. You're not having to read 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, classical musicians who've been doing it for decades will go A, G, B, E. Will be counting up as well. So you don't see these things very often. Similarly, in the bass end, if you've got a note that's quite low, you're going to end up with a very low note there as well. You can actually get notes on the bass clef that mix into the treble clef. So if I put a C in the middle C, if I keep going, I can actually have high notes on the bass clef that are the same as the lower notes in the treble clef. So you do get a degree of overlap there. Now you can have chords. If I just get rid of that now, if I just put a chord down, a chord is 3 notes that sound together. So melody is where you have 1 note at a time which creates the tune, and then you have chords which create the harmony. They create the sort of the bit in the middle of the musical sandwich that holds it all together. So I have myself a C, E and G there, which gives me a C chord. Now, more about this in another video, but the notes here essentially you get different places on the musical stave which tell you where the note is on the piano. Other musical instruments, it's basically the same idea. The piano is useful because it is a music theory tool. You can see everything before even playing anything. It's a bit different on a violin, for example, where you've got to find the note and then bow it. But on the piano, you have a series of buttons, so it's a really good idea to get used to the piano and where those notes appear. Now, I'm using a program here called Muse Score, which is a free download. So you actually, if you've got a little MIDI keyboard at home, and it needn't be a mega piano and connected to a big computer, a laptop with a USB socket will do, because you can get things like this. This is a tiny little Akai mini keyboard that you can use to do programming, whatever you want to do, whether it's in Logic or Ableton or anything like that. But essentially you've got 2 octaves of the big piano here. That's enough to get started, and it's just got a little USB on the side, and away you go. And you can then, with Muse Score, you can learn where those notes are on the stave.